And it got us, I guess that's got us thinking about what I asked to be our first topic for the day, which we were on it. I wanted to bring up talking about the prenups, and
Mm.
there was a lot of talk about prenups on the internet. And of course, that's being overshadowed by a lot of other bigger topics right now. But there was a lot of conversation about prenuptial agreements going through Twitter and X. And, I was listening to it and thinking about it. And I'm not married. I'm not married. And actually, I was married at some point. Sorry about that, working on the lighting here. So I was married. I am divorced. And I have always been of this mindset that, when it comes to finances and when it comes to partnership, I think that, so thinking one step back, when I talk to my clients and they refer to their significant other as their partner, I find it to be one of the most attractive things ever, right? And often
Mm-hmm.
when I'm talking to partners, I'm talking to them about how to protect their legacy. They're buying a house. We're talking about trust. We're talking about things, but we don't ever talk about prenups. And I don't know what those prenuptial agreements are. And sometimes people think like you only need a prenup if you're coming to the table with a lot of, money. And maybe that's not the case. And I'm pretty sure, Nasima, you're going to have a lot of good things to say on this topic. But, is financial literacy an important topic? Should we be, as women, as men, having these conversations about financial literacy early on? Should we be aligned with where we envision this partnership going? Partnerships work. They don't have to be the same person. They don't have to be in the same place, but you got to be walking in the same direction in life, right? The goal, the target, whatever you're looking at, you got to be at least focused in the same direction. So, are prenups important? Is financial literacy important? What are we talking about and what makes that matter? So, in your line of work, Nasima, do you ever run into a situation where someone might be having a life or death situation, or there might be something going on and she's, talking about these issues of prenups coming up? I mean, how does this, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, like personally, I wish I could have benefited from a prenup. I have been divorced technically twice. So,
Three times a
uh,
charm, girl. Try it one more time.
listen, no, So, I actually did an interesting podcast episode with Aaron Thomas, and he has a website called prenups.com. He's the prenups guy on all social media. And just his take on prenups is so interesting. And it's basically just a formalized financial plan with your partner that not only talks about what will happen if you separate, which is what most people think about a prenup as, but it gives you a guideline on how to discuss your finances and manage your finances in your relationship. So if you think that we all know that divorce is caused majority of the time by financial issues, right? Financial
Mhm.
issues is a leading cause of divorce. Why would everybody just have a prenup? And it's because there's this negative stigma around it. Just because you typically don't hear about prenups until you hear about somebody rich and famous that had a prenup or didn't have a prenup and lost all this money, but really everybody should have a prenup. What it does initially in the setup process, if you haven't ever like done a deep dive in your finances before you can sit down and even create a prenup, you actually have to come to the table with all of your assets laid out and laid bare and put everything out there, and then come to a common agreement on how you, number one, are going to manage these finances in your marriage, and then how these finances would be divided if you were to break up. But you can also, like Aaron has in his own prenup, stipulate that before we even get to divorce, we are going to have, first of all, just as a baseline in our marriage, we're going to go to counseling 2 or 3 times a year just as a check-in. Then, if we think we want to break up, we have to do a compulsory amount, like 10 sessions of therapy before we can even get there.
Oh wow.
Then, when we get there, we have to go through all these levels of mediation before it could even get to a point where they would actually get to the dissolution process. And so these are things that people don't think about when they think about a prenup, because they just think it's about, oh, it's only if I have money and we have to divide assets. It's not. It's for everybody to come to a common understanding and have a legal document that you design that is going to tell everyone how you want to divide your assets. Because, like it or not, everyone who gets married or even is in a domestic partnership, like which was my case, is that you are going to have a prenup established for you. It's just the one that the state decides and not the one that you decide.
Right.
So if I don't want the state to make decisions for me because they don't know what my best interest is. We know what our best interests are. So why not come to a common understanding?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
have a question. So the domestic partnership, what defined that? Was that just the length of time that you guys were together? So there was some state law that stipulated that it was considered a domestic partnership, or was there like an agreed upon entry into the partnership?
So you know how people like to get into domestic partnerships all willy-nilly, like, oh, I need like to add you to my insurance, so I'll put you as my domestic partner. Well, I was actually married and I had a very bad divorce, and so with my new partner, we were living together and we moved out of state together, and so I needed to be on his insurance. And in order to do that, knowing that we didn't want to get married, he added me as his domestic partner. Now, the thing that makes it similar to a marriage is that we bought assets during this time and we had a child together. So at that point, in order to dissolve that, unless you have a clear common understanding, and if there's a child, there's almost no way without going to a court, you have to get another like divorce, a divorce decree. Like, so you have to go to court. They have to decide to divide assets, child support, all of that stuff. And then it comes with a whole nother divorce decree.
Wow.
Dang.
I'm not going to lie. This is the first time in my life I've ever heard a prenup being broken down like that. I did think that I was one of the ignorant ones that thought it was just about your finances, or the fact that if you had to have a certain amount, not had to, but it was only worth getting one if you had a certain amount of money. So I appreciate you breaking that down. So for everybody on here that's been married before, I have also, and what's going on with us, this married and divorce crew? But has anybody ever had a prenup?
No, I met my ex-husband when I was 20 years old, and I met him at Bible study, and those were not even thoughts that I had. I mean, I shouldn't have even gotten married, right? Those are young, it's young love, very hasty. And I think the idea of a prenup is popularized, or the reason why I think it got so hot on Twitter a week ago was because they're talking about, I think the logic behind it is, if the divorce rate is so high and there's a high probability of this relationship not working out, take a logical approach to it and say, hey, let's plan ahead for this. The other thought that I had is, I think this is exactly why, because this is a common topic and it's not as taboo, and it shouldn't indicate that you're hoping that the relationship should fail. I think it's why women are so attracted to men that are emotionally intelligent, right? Because I can't have an emotionally intelligent conversation with someone about this plan, right? Well, let's say we're both broke, but we wrote this prenuptial agreement that said, hey, if we got into a situation where we were seriously considering a breakup, but we made an agreement ahead of time that this marriage would not be dissolved unless we went to X amount of sessions with the therapist, we might turn around our marriage. That might keep this going another 10 years, right? I think there's a level of emotional maturity that you have to come to the table with, emotional intelligence, to be able to have these sort of conversations and say, hey, listen, I'm not 20 years old. This isn't young puppy love. Like, we're grown. We've been through a few things. Can we sit down and talk about how we would like to handle conflict? Because if we were in a heightened emotional state, we might not be able to think clearly or properly communicate this to each other. So I haven't had a prenup, but those were the thoughts I was having as Nasima was eloquently breaking that down.
Yeah, that prenup is almost like having an accountability partner. Like, that's dope. That's super dope.
Yeah.
And also, if you're already in a situation, you can get a postnup. So anybody at any point in their relationship can do the process. It's the exact same process, except you're already married. And so you're just coming and bringing all those financial documents and putting together those plans like that. So I just recommend people who are new to the process and just want to learn a little bit more, follow Aaron Thomas. He has amazing content, or go to prenups.com if you want to learn more, or just Google him, because he has some great interviews where he breaks it down way more eloquently than I can.
Yeah.
So go ahead,
I got a question about these prenuptial agreements. So these are the same agreements that can stipulate how, if the relationship goes bad and for what reasons, right? We can stipulate those things ahead of time as well. Because, falling on rough times is one thing. Being out of alignment, one thing. Not making, life getting too busy, not making enough time for each other, one thing. You cheating on me, I'm going to be a lot less gracious in that negotiation. So how how would you, or does anyone have any advice? Because I'm not married. I'm not a part of the married and divorced crew. I'm not a part of the married crew. I'm the part of the 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 rich auntie crew. And so that being said, what do I, given the future that I see for myself, right? If my life goes according to plan, when, you want to make God laugh, have a plan, but, I got some things moving, right? I got a little bit of motion. And so if I want to protect those things, I never would, when I think about marriage, I was in a 7-year relationship a while ago, right? And I never would have thought at any point, breaking up wasn't on the table for me, right? Divorce would have never been, like, I don't want to do this again. I don't want to have to go through this again. But going through even a breakup of a 7-year relationship was so sticky and so muddy. And I was not the same person that I was when I started that relationship, not even
Yep.
close. And
Yep.
so what advice would you give someone who is still kind of emerging in their life, becoming who they are becoming, not knowing where their future is going to take them?
The advice to that person is don't get married.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're too young to
I
get married.
mean, but that's not necessary. I don't think I'm too young to get married. I'm 34 years old. So if I
No,
decide
you
to
said
get
the
married,
advice to that person. I thought we were talking about the hypothetical person.
let me be more specific. How should Kaylani negotiate her prenuptial agreement?
I think you should really understand what's important to you and understand that, like you said, in that relationship, you weren't the same person that you're not the same person now as the person that you were when you went into that relationship. So understand there needs to be some flexibility, and in that there needs to be discussions, but that's what you write into there. You write in growing, how do you get through growing pains? Like, how do we work through these issues? And like I was saying, like the built-in like therapy sessions every couple of months, twice a year, whatever, because the only thing that's constant is change. People are going to change. You can't control how you change or how another person changes. But like Patty said, it's going into a relationship with a plan. Okay. Because if yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is, I'll say the reason why that's so important, and this is, I take full accountability for this. There were a lot. I went to premarital counseling. I did all of the things that you're supposed to do. There were still a lot of tough conversations that we did not have beforehand. And the way that I'm hearing now, as a person that is, had the marriage failed, the marriage failed, is a prenup will force you to have those tough conversations. And if those tough conversations get too uncomfortable, there's a big chance that is not your person, because everything has to be on the table. Like for me, there were certain areas I think that we both avoided, especially when we talked about money, because when I was married, I was making more money and I never wanted him to feel like, I always wanted him to feel like the man. I never wanted that to be a whole thing, right? And so it was like, yeah, let's not worry about deep diving. I mean, it was mentioned and it was a known fact. But I think that had we had those tough conversations, I would have seen some things during those conversations to be like, let me push the button. Because, I mean, to the point of the question that's even floating across the screen about, does financial literacy matter in a marriage? 150%. And to your point of, finances being one of the huge reasons why people do get a divorce. At the end of the day, if you're not talking finances and if you're not comfortable with talking finances, that is not a person you want to spend the rest of your life with on either side, right?
And it's going to come up to bite you. Like, men are going to say, "Oh, I would never take your money," and women say that, "I would never take your money." But when it comes to the court of law, first of all, I always tell people you should have to go through a divorce before you get married, because you will see people's true colors. And then secondly, like, it's there to divide your assets. It's never going to be in your best interest. So somebody is going to feel jaded and cheated. And when those emotions come out, then that's when the claws come out. So
Yeah. But I think, Jade, you highlighted the most important part, the tough conversations, right? So if you're preparing for marriage and the conversation of a prenuptial agreement is something that could derail the relationship, then you're right. That wasn't the relationship that you were supposed to be in.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the biggest issue. We're talking, I think as women, if a man is avoiding conflict, like if they don't appreciate a conversation that can provoke some sort of conflict and cannot work through that, let's talk about how you're going to feel 7 years down the line when some major catastrophe happens, or you're dealing with grief, losing members of the family, you're dealing with maybe complications in childbirth. There are going to be so many things that are going to enrage you emotionally that you're going to have to work through. So a very simple conversation about how we want to address those things, if that's too much of a conflict, that is a major red flag. So gentlemen, if you are listening to this, we're not asking you to be rich. We're not asking for 8 figures. We're not asking you to for those things. What we're asking you is to come to the table with a conversation and to be able to be emotionally intelligent enough to talk through how we'll manage conflict throughout the relationship, because change is guaranteed, conflict is guaranteed, and the only thing that really can carry you through those things is good communication. So if we're not asking for that bare minimum, I don't know what we're doing anymore, ladies. That's what we got to do.
That's good.
The last thing I want to say about this, because since we're talking about the financial component about this, I want to talk about housing and things like that. But before we get into that, I'm learning about the belief system of marriage through a biblical and a kingdom lens versus a secular, institution lens of what marriage is to people in America, right? And so when I think about exactly what you said, Patty, men come with a conversation and some emotional intelligence here, and come standing on business, right? Don't just care about me when I'm doing something for you. If at any point you become a different person, and man, I hate that.
Okay, Lonnie, let me correct you real quick before you finish. That right there is the biggest myth ever. You will both become different people. Like, we are human beings, and we will grow and we will change. And nobody warns us up front that the person that you married at 32 is going to be a different, and you're supposed to grow and change together. And sometimes that looks like this, and sometimes it looks like this, but you still got it. You're supposed to be able to stick it out if it's not toxic or unhealthy, but that change is going to happen. So go ahead and finish. I'm sorry.
Well, I agree wholeheartedly. That change, I think I've experienced that, not in a marriage, but in a long-term relationship. I experienced that. And so, and the ugly part for me was when it was all done and we decided like, hey, this doesn't work, that I became the scum of the earth, right? Because I chose to remove myself from an unhealthy environment. All of a sudden, all of the things, all of the little threads, all of the ties that we had together became problematic, right? Now, all of the bills that I've paid, because I too was making more money, right? The bills that I paid and the assets and then the cars and the things, all of the things, it became it became a problem when it didn't serve you. So I think, I think you guys get what I'm saying. And not to say that we couldn't be the one to change. I think it inevitably happens, but I can't say that I've compromised my core character and how I show up for someone, or, my desire to want the best for someone, even if that's not with me.